Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Future is Old, the podcast about the one thing we all become, old. I'm Peter Caldas.
I'm Rach Angard.
And Rach, today I want to talk about marketing.
Let's talk about marketing.
I'm in the sort of market for a new pair of glasses.
Okay.
And I came across this company called Caddis.
Okay.
And their whole marketing sort of scheme caught my eye. And I want to read to you what I saw on their website.
Caught your eye, you say?
You see what I did there? Get older, own it, see stuff. We're here to call out the whole fountain of youth illusion, industries that profit from the fear of getting older and the concept of aging gracefully. That is front and center on their website.
Wow.
And I am telling you, I am clicking to see which frames suit my face.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I also love that it's kind of funny too. It's like, see stuff. We're done. Guess what? Everybody needs glasses.
And why hide it? And I love that this brand has just completely owned that marketing.
Yeah.
Who's not getting it right, Rach?
Most people. There's one that, I keep thinking about this company called Drunk Elephant. Now, I'm not on TikTok, okay? But I hear about TikTok.
Yeah.
And Drunk Elephant is like a big brand among children on TikToks. They're like specifically marketing to 8-year-olds and like 9-year-olds. Expensive anti-aging creams.
Wait.
Yes.
Anti-aging for 8-year-olds?
For 8-year-olds. Because they're calling it preventive. I've been hearing a lot about preventive Botox that like people in their 20s are doing. It's very much being marketed to very young women and teenagers.
Wow.
Yes. So it's like, which is of course preying on ageist attitudes, but also then advertising to people who don't. I mean, do I think anybody needs Botox? No. But people who especially don't need it, but they're calling it preventive to instill the fear of aging into them.
It is amazing how the marketing machine that we grew up in somehow values creating fear of getting older so you buy their product. And meanwhile, we leave what happens to us after 30, 40, 50, 60 to who? Like who in the C-suites is thinking about consumers who are older?
Nobody. And think about who's working in these companies, right?
Right.
Like, so there's so many younger people I know who work in marketing, and it's like, but we can't just have a bunch of 30-somethings working on marketing, because then who's marketing to their parents or their grandparents? They're not even thinking about them.
And it's weird because, it's really expensive. Affordability is an issue.
Yes.
Gen Zers, millennials are struggling to have the things that boomers and Gen Xers were able to afford.
Yes.
And I think companies are missing out on huge investment opportunities. They can make money as well.
Right. From older people.
From older clients and older consumers.
Yes.
And by the way, I want to see myself in ads.
Would love to. And would love to see who I'm going to become.
I need to see more bald men in ads.
I'm starting a petition. More bald men in advertising.
Right?
Yeah. 100,000 signatures, taking it straight to the government.
I mean, this is why we're doing this podcast, right?
Yes.
We need this narrative to change.
We do.
And that's why I'm really excited about our next guest.
Ooh, okay. I can't wait to meet him.
Our guest today is a psychologist, gerontologist, and best-selling author of 19 books, all about aging. As the founder and CEO of AgeWave, he works with companies to understand the social and business implications and opportunities of a growing older adult population. He is a phenomenal leader in the aging field, and I'm very excited to have him on our podcast, The Future is Old. Welcome, Dr. Ken Dychtwald.
Great to be with you guys. Nice to see you. Hi, Rach.
Hello.
Hi, Peter.
Hi, Ken.
It's so good to see you, Ken. Can you give us a sense of what a gerontologist does?
Well, there's sort of two views. One is a gerontologist is someone who goes to school and gets a graduate degree in gerontology, the study of aging and older adults. But it's also a hybrid field. So people come at it from medicine, from social work, from psychology, from urban design. And so the field is populated by all sorts of folks with all sorts of talents.
And so how did you come into wanting to become a gerontologist?
Well, like so many things in life, it was serendipity. I was in my early 20s, this was the early 1970s, and I was finishing my first book, a book called Body Mind, and I was developing some expertise with regard to what was then being called holistic therapies. yoga, meditation, biofeedback, breathing, nutrition. And I got asked to head up the first preventative health research study with older adults in Berkeley, California. And here I was, 24, surrounded by older men and women, and I found myself honestly captivated by them, their viewpoint. What does it look like to see a life from 90 years? What about the whole idea of regrets? What are the lessons we ought to be learning when we're young about aging and longevity so that we can live a thoughtful and mindful and productive and purposeful life? And so I got involved very young. And then in the early 80s, I served as an advisor to the Office of Technology Assessment. There was a 2-year study project to examine how demography was going to alter the marketplace and the workplace in our lives. And what I saw then was what we're living through now, which was that there would be more and more older people, fewer young people, and the baby boom generation, which back then was the never trust anyone over 30 bunch, we would be growing old, and what looked to me to be an age wave. And I got a little frustrated with the not-for-profit sector, and I decided to start a company 4 years ago named AgeWave. And as you were kind enough to mention, we've been in existence and have advised about half the Fortune 500, and have had a kind of a great ride.
So we're going to have a great conversation today about the role of business and aging and marketing. And I think what's interesting about Ken Rach is he comes at it from a perspective that I think you'll find really relatable from the nonprofit space, from his experience and impact.
Yeah.
And I think it's very cool to see how his career in this space has really opened, I think, the eyes of the nonprofit sector. So I want to get into that a little bit. Ken, take me back to the 80s as you're noticing businesses starting to wake up to a powerful group of folks with cash who are willing to spend, or what was the problem you were trying to solve that caught the attention of these companies?
Well, the not-for-profit sector aging field, in my view, largely grew from the civil rights movement. It's populated by really good people, highly intentioned, big-hearted men and women who concern themselves with older adults who are largely vulnerable and struggling. And what I realized was, thinking of my own mom and dad, that they weren't struggling, they were middle class, but my dad was blind from his diabetes and my mom did have Alzheimer's. And what struck me was that nobody was thinking about the average older adult and how they get in and out of cars and what they do with their free time and what kind of foods they like to eat and how do they care for themselves better and where do they want to go on vacation. And so what I was struck by was that there were these massive opportunities sitting in front of the business community that they were largely avoiding.
And how is it received? I mean, you must have sounded cuckoo to these business leaders who are like, "No, we're good. We know what we're doing, man. Who are you?"
Well, back then I had an asset, and the asset was that I was very young. And so, I was born in 1950, so I'm in my mid 70s now. But back then when I was in my 30s or even 40s, people would say, "What's this young guy doing talking about older people?" And I worked very hard at my communication skills. I got coached and trained and studied because I felt like I got a sort of like the Paul Revere thing, the aging are coming. So I had to be convincing. And many people in the aging field are sympathetic and empathetic, but persuasive, they're not. So I had to be able to wake them up. And I would tell you that one of my lessons was, guys, that the early interest came almost always from the chairman CEO, whose job it was to look out into the future. So the middle management, their job was to make sure that this month, this quarter, this year was going according to plan. But when I got a call from Lee Iacocca and he wanted to know in 10 years, what kind of cars do we need to put in the market? that was provocative when Ralph Larson, the chairman of Johnson and Johnson, called me up to say, "Hey, our tagline is babies are our business, our only business." He said, "Are we missing something?" And when Letterley called and they had the Centrum vitamin line in the market and they wanted to know what we thought about whether older adults needed or would take supplements, because they were thinking of kind of revitalizing Geritol, which was like our grandparents' generation. And instead, we talked them into coming up with Centrum Silver, which became $1 billion product within a year or two. And it was sort of one after the other. We came into different industries and got them to look at the opportunities that were not exploitative. I've never been willing to work on something that was perceived as or was exploitative of older adults, but rather could help people who are growing older live better, more secure, more comfortable, more vital lives.
Let's get a little technical here with one of those clients, Ken. I'm wondering, walk us through how the company received what you were selling. In other words, there's so much age bias inherent in everything we do, and I'm sure it was true in the 80s and the 90s. What were some practical tips that you could maybe offer others who are trying to break into this space to overcome these horrible narratives around aging that are so embedded in marketers? What was your secret sauce?
Well, let me give you a couple of examples because it wasn't one size fits all, but it's a great question, Peter. First of all, you have to do your homework. If you come in and just wave a flag, older people are great, you're up against all sorts of youth bias.
No one listens.
And beliefs that older people are set in their ways and stuck doing and buying and wearing what they used to do and buy and wear. So, for example, I'll give you a simple example. As I mentioned, Johnson & Johnson became a client of ours, and the people at McNeil, which is one of their divisions, Tylenol was their biggest product. But Tylenol is acetaminophen. It's got no anti-inflammatory properties to it, but it does diminish pain. And there were 40 million arthritis sufferers in this country. So we work with them to work with the Arthritis Foundation to redesign the container, to make it easier to open if you had arthritis, and suggest a 12-hour version so that people who had arthritis could have their pain diminished without any of the gastrointestinal difficulties that came with. But let me give you a really weird, different example.
Okay.
These are great.
I know. I'm really
love this.
Yeah, this is fascinating.
Well, here's a weird example that in a million years wouldn't cross your mind. One of my clients was Baxter Travenol, which was a hospital supply company, and they wanted to know what were the needs going to be of an aging population. And obviously, in terms of hospital supplies, they're going to be vast. But the chairman was a guy named Vernon Laux. This was maybe 25 years ago. And Vernon said to me, "Hey, Ken, would you do me a favor? I've got a buddy who runs a company in St. Louis. Would you give him a free day of your time?" Sure. So I fly to St. Louis and I meet with the Anheuser-Busch company, and his buddy was Augie Busch. And I did a briefing about how the age wave was going to impact the beer industry. And the news was not good for that company because people get older, men have larger prostate glands, and they just not going to drink a six-pack of beer. And so they were really bummed out when they heard the age wave story. Then at lunch, I'm sitting with Augie and his two sons, and he said to me, "Well, the people who are 45 or 50 or more like beer. Yeah, they love it. They're just not going to drink that much of it. So should we create a new product?" And I said, I wouldn't do it. It takes $50 to $100 million to create a new product, and it could flop.
Boy.
So he turned to his son and he said, "Do we have any brands that are sort of dead in the water that a 50-year-old would recognize the name and that we could kind of bring it back to life?" And his son said, "Well, there's Michelob, but it's kind of worthless." And Augie said to me, "What would you do with Michelob?" I said, "I would take out the carbs, take down the calories, and charge a lot of money for it. Would you call it Michelob Light?" I said, "No, I'd call it Michelob Ultra."
Genius.
And, it's now the most successful beer relaunch in history. And that was targeted to people 50 and older.
Wow. That's even just
I
the
want to
name
say on
Michelob
top of
Ultra.
that the bias that a lot of people in business have is they think of older people as falling down and can't get up. So I've heard,
Right.
I was
Right.
involved with Andy Dibner when he created the first Lifeline, and that was 40 plus years ago.
Mm.
But that's what people generally think of, which is that older people are frail and vulnerable. Versus they've got more
Yeah.
free time than anyone else. Maybe they ought to be targets for the gaming industry, or they take vitamins because they
Right.
want to feel good and look great, or they want to buy gifts for their grandchildren. And so widening the view of the business community to all the ways in which people
Yeah.
in their adult years could be great consumers has been a fun part of my ride over these decades.
Yeah.
Ken, how do we keep doing that? How do we create a multiplier effect to the trailblazing work you've done? Because you were a bit of a unicorn when you started your age wave, right? I think that's fair. Tell me what do we need to do more of?
And can I pop a quick question onto
Yeah.
that too as you're talking about this? Is I'd love to know like what do we need to do more of? And also, are you seeing more ageism or less ageism today in marketing? I think those
Good
kind of go
question.
hands in hand. So I'd love to hear what you think about both of those.
All right, let me hit the second question first. In the 1990s, when Lou Gerstner was running American Express, Lou was the chairman, CEO, and one of the greats. Former McKinsey guy went on to run RJR Nabisco and then IBM. Passed away this past year, but truly one of the great leaders I've ever encountered, and I've met many, as you might imagine. Lou in the 90s asked me to bring to him all of the great ads that had people over 50 in them. Well, it was easy because there were only 3 ads on all of television that had people over 50 in them.
I can only
Mrs. Olson,
imagine.
Jeez.
Folgers
Yeah.
Coffee, Mr. Whipple, Squeeze, toilet paper, and Wilford Brimley from Quaker Oat. That was it.
Oh, Wilford
So
Brimley
back
was,
to your
yeah.
question,
Great.
is there less ageism? Well, you're seeing more and more older people in particularly news shows. The pharmaceutical industry
Yeah.
has gone kind of berserk. But
Yeah.
you're seeing, there's Jamie Lee Curtis, starring, winning her
Hmm.
first awards in her later years, and Harrison Ford
Hmm.
in his 80s still killing it, and Jagger and the Stones still out there. So there are examples now of older adults that there weren't before, but there is still
Hmm.
ageism, so it's still got to be battled, and we've got to win over the
Yeah.
minds and hearts. By the way, one of the biggest problems is that most of the people who work for advertising companies or marketing groups are young because older
Yeah.
people are retired.
Hmm.
So if you're sitting around the table, I went to a session for General Mills years ago in Minneapolis where they had 250 people who were working on the mature market projects. And I said to them, how
Oh
many of
boy.
you in this room are over the age of 50?
Oh no,
Zero.
no hands.
So
Jeez.
getting
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
older people fighting and being involved and being role models and examples, not just the guy that jumps out of an airplane or water skis with a rope between his teeth, but real people from all walks of life is critical. To your question, Peter, how do we multiply it?
Yeah.
Can I be frank here?
Totally.
Yes.
Well, the aging field, as I mentioned, came out of the civil rights movement, in my view, and
Mm.
has largely been anti-capitalist.
Mm.
Mm.
Businesses are bad, financial firms are bad, you can't trust them. And so, unfortunately, very little of the attention to the business community has come from the aging
Mm.
field. It's come from outliers like me and a handful of others. I think if more and more people working in the aging field kind of knocked on the door of their local chamber of commerce or went to their local businesses or boards of companies and said, hey, let me show you opportunities that you may never have imagined existed.
Hmm.
And I would say that
That's
having
a great
spoken now to
point. Yeah.
2.5 million people over the course of my career, I 3/4 of the time get introduced. Ken Dychtwald is going to talk about the problems of an aging society. And I always think, geez, we spent 100,000 years trying to make old people, and now they're doing a pretty darn good job. We're calling it a big problem. So we got a head shift that's got to happen.
Ken, I've heard you talk a little bit about the history of I don't think it's really, you don't call it the history of ageism, but you sort of walk us through a little bit of how we used to revere aging and how that's changed. Can you bring that up a little bit and help us understand sort of the evolution of age bias?
Back before the industrial era, so before the 20th century, older people were revered. You know, if you can picture the signing of the Constitution in the late 1700s, all those, they were guys, but they were wearing white wigs or they powdered their hair white. And, I was looking at that painting the other day, and there's a guy talking to Benjamin Franklin. He looks like an old man, but it was 32-year-old Alexander Hamilton. And so you have to stop and say, what was that about? Well, it was believed before the industrial era that older people were wiser, more experienced, more resilient. And this might sound a little bit odd, but because there was no real understanding of germs and death from bacteria and cures that came along in the 20th century, it was believed that older people were chosen by God, that those who survived were meant to survive. And so there was kind of a reverence given to older people. But then the 20th century came along, and all of a sudden life on the farm wasn't the game anymore. It was working in the factories and building the cities. And it was the young, strong backs that were the beginnings of the 20th century, the roaring 20s. But then it really kicked in with television. A lot of people don't realize, we think of all the new technologies today, AI and so on. In 1946, when the baby boom started, there were only 8,000 television sets in America. And then it went wild.
Whoa.
And
that's crazy.
A key change that TV triggered was that kids could watch the television. They didn't pay much attention to the news. They didn't read the newspaper. And all of a sudden, the notion came out that between the ages of about 15 and 25 is when people were forming their brand loyalties. So what kind of clothing do I wear? What kind of shoes am I going to wear? One day, what kind of car am I going to buy? What kind of toothpaste do I use? And generally, it was believed that people would keep that relationship for life. And so the entire world of modern media back in the mid-20th century focused on young people, because the older generation, first of all, they grew up during the Depression, so they were very frugal. And second, they were set in their ways. And so we grew up in an era where all of a sudden youth became glorified. And, Pepsi really led the charge for those who think young. And we've lived most of our life in a world where the marketing and business communities have been of the belief that you should go after young people because older people won't spend any money and they were already set in their ways. Fast forward to now. Turns out that 70% of all the wealth in America is held by people over 50, and young people are broke. On top of that,
True.
Most everything that I bought and wore and drove back when I was a young man doesn't even exist anymore. And there's new ideas, new products, new possibilities coming along with every minute. And so the older population is turning their attention to them and are becoming probably the most viable consumers that the world has ever seen. And the boomer generation, this is a little bit problematic when it comes to retirement savings, but like to spend money, like to use credit cards, like to be ageless or youthful. And so our youth obsession was not the way it was throughout most of history. It was a short-term trend, and it is now reversing itself. I think we're seeing more and more regard and respect for, look at Next 50. Look at the fact that we're having this discussion. This would not have happened 20 years ago.
Right.
No, that's a great point, Ken. And I think it has to do with the fact that the boomers got older and in the 80s weren't willing to take anything sitting down, and now are fighting back against the same stereotypes, which is helping others.
Yeah.
I think also, I think companies are waking up finally and are following the dollar a little bit. I'm wondering, Ken, from your experience today, which companies out there are getting it right? Like, who's studying the older consumer? Who's doing really good stuff in targeting older customers?
Okay, I'll answer that question, but I don't want to make the point that these are the only industries where there's
No, they're just
a game to be
examples. Just
played.
examples.
I'd say it's three or four. First, anything having to do with keeping your body healthy longer, particularly the pharmaceutical industry. It's almost nauseating, but 77% of all the pharmaceutical products are consumed by people over 50. And so, man, oh man, oh man, are they
Whoa.
going after that full on. I've heard as much
Yeah.
as a quarter of the entire advertising industry in America are pharmaceutical ads. Second, the
Whoa. Oof.
the financial services industry. You know, look at all of the financial companies from the Merrill Lynches of the world to the Edward Jones of the world, all of whom have been clients of ours, to Thrivent, to Ameriprise, and so on, who realize that, you know, Willie Sutton had it right. You go to where the money is. And turns out that older adults have the greatest concentration of savings, investments, home equity of any group in the country ever. Now, this is going to sound like a play on ideas, but the poorest segment of American society, poorest subsegment, are older single women. But also the richest subsegment of American society are older single women, both.
Yep.
So
Whoa,
think about it.
what? That's fascinating.
Women become, you know, we hear that there's $100 trillion worth of intergenerational wealth transfer about to happen. But we often think, oh, that'll go right to the kids and grandkids. No, it'll go to the spouses because women live 5+ years longer than men.
Oh.
So women are about to become the most powerful consumer spending group in the history of the world, older women.
Whoa.
So financial services and health-related products. Third, I would say travel and leisure. You know, they understand that the boomer generation is going to have 3.7 trillion hours of free time over the next 20 years.
Ooh.
That has never happened before. And these are
Yeah.
people who want to explore the world, have peak experiences, visit their kids, grandkids, go on a cruise. I also think that volunteerism, Peter, you and I have discussed this for years now, is about to get a shot in the arm as more and more older people find themselves retired and bored. So what can I
Yeah.
do to give back? What can I do to play a role in my church, in my synagogue, in my mosque, in the school in my community? How can I help families in need? So I think that those four areas are about to get turbocharged.
Those are great examples, Ken, because I think what you're doing is you're touching on all facets of our life, right? And I think that's what's interesting. You know, I was speaking recently with a small cruise line and pointing out that they wanted to be, they called me because they wanted to be more age inclusive in their
Oh.
marketing materials. But when you look at their marketing materials, it didn't reflect that. And I said, okay, well, what's the age of your average consumer? And they said, oh, 62, 63. And, you know, they have the money to spend on the cruise. And I
Yeah.
said, great. Where is that person in this marketing brochure? Well, we're selling aspiration.
Aspiration of being 30?
20 again.
Yeah, right.
And they'd all had this aha moment. And I'm thinking, these are professional marketing people. These are really thoughtful business leaders running successful cruise lines. And yet they have this age bias so embedded in them that they
Yeah.
can't even see how it impacts their bottom line. That's what's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, let me
Anyway, and I think nonprofits
let
do
me
as
share
well.
something with you about that. A word that I've heard for decades now is the taint. What do you mean? Well, we don't want our cruise line to be thought of as where old people are. The young people won't come.
Oh,
And so, by the way, in the cruise industry, and many of you will find, your viewers and listeners will find this provocative, they avoid showing pictures of who their clients actually are because they don't want to cause young people to not want to take that trip. So we've got to be more age diverse and age inclusive. And I think that's really important. And by the way, people have to learn how to do that. And they've got to see great examples where it works. And then they've got to take a shot.
Ken, thank you for all of that. Before I turn you over to Rach with her rapid fire questions, I want to ask you a question that I know you and I have talked about in prior years since we've known each other so long. And I want to ask you about your legacy. You've been in this space now for over 50 years. What is sort of the legacy you want to leave behind?
Well, I first want to say that the most important dimension of legacy for me is my relationship with my wife and my kids, and I'm about to become a grandfather for the first time. So,
Oh my gosh,
Amazing.
congrats.
yeah, our child is going to be half American, half Chinese. Our grandchild's name is going to be Theo, and his
Aw.
mom is Chinese, and our son, they live in Shanghai. In terms of
Oh
my
wow.
work, I don't know. I'd like to be thought of as a guy that tried to make life better for people as they grew older. I
Mm.
tried to shine a positive light on the possibilities and opportunities that come in life with being 50, 60, 70, or 90 or beyond. And I've tried to break the gerontology field out of its historical pattern and continue to shape new ideas and new possibilities. By the way, Peter, we've known each other a long while. I don't feel done with that. I still feel there's a lot of work to be done.
There is, and I want you to know you're that for me, Ken. I've told you this hundreds of times, but you've
Thank you.
definitely been an influence on my work, and I really appreciate you. So, Rach, you want to take it away?
I do. My first question is, will you be my mentor? I'm just joking. Okay, but here's my actual rapid fire questions. What do you not miss about being younger?
Well, let me first say that I had a pretty great young life. But what do I not miss? The absence of depth. And I might have thought that I was, I had
Mm.
written my first 3 or 4 books before I was 35. So, I was sort of in it early on. But looking back now, I could see that, I was young. There was a certain degree of foolishness and enthusiasm, and which was holding the place for what would come later on when it was more perspective and maybe even little bits of wisdom here and there.
Hmm. Great. And then next one is, what is the gold in getting old?
I would say depth. My love for my wife is deeper than it's ever been. And, at the
Mm.
risk of sounding like a crazy man, when Maddie and I got married in 1983, I asked her that later that night we were at a bed and breakfast if she would marry me every year. And she said, people don't do that. And I said, I don't know. They celebrate Easter every year and Halloween every year. Why don't you celebrate your relationships, whether it's with your spouse or your partner or your best friends? So we've been married 43 times in different locations with different religions. So that's something I appreciate. It's an example or a manifestation of the depth. I would also say that having had a bajillion discussions about this age wave, with presidents, with world leaders. Jimmy Carter brought me in to help him for a year think through his own thoughts about aging, death, and beyond in his book,
Mm.
Virtues of Aging. I've been a part of so many fascinating explorations that I think there's just more depth in how I feel about people and
Mm.
what frightens me, frankly, also. Um, and in the possibilities that I see that are still unrealized.
Okay, great. Ken, this is our last one for you. If you can finish this sentence, I will know the future is old when.
It is old, and when is now, when we're having discussions like this on the air.
Love that. The future is old. The future is now.
The future is
Yeah,
now.
Yeah.
it's
Ken,
not about the
yeah.
future anymore. It's now. And I can
Yeah.
remember, I wrote Age Wave. It came out it was my 8th book. It came out in 1989. Old was going to be way out in the future. We're now in the
Mm.
future, and this is a key part of what's going on in our lives, that we're growing older,
Yeah.
all of us, and
Yeah.
the center of gravity has shifted upwards.
Ken, thank you so much. You mentioned that you're still in the game, which is a no-brainer, knowing you. Tell us a little bit about what's going on. What do you have going on right now? Where can people find your book or books or events that you have coming up?
I don't usually promote books. By the way, I'm not earning any of the revenue from this book. I'm donating it to Esalen Institute. It's called Radical
Mm.
Curiosity. It's my memoir. It came out a couple of years ago, Radical Curiosity. My website is agewave.com, and I'm working on a kind of a cluster of things. We're working on a TV special. We're working
Cool.
on a major project to look at financial caregiving, which is becoming a serious issue. A lot of attention
Mm.
focused on caregiving, but very little on financial caregiving. Last year, there were more employees in America caregiving parents than children. And
Wow.
a group of us are coming together to see if we can put together some kind of a massive elder corps to create a whole new purpose and story for life after one's key career. Because we think that there's just a vast amount of talent and skills and resources that are not being utilized.
Yeah.
You have a lot of great ideas, and I'm glad you're getting them out there. So thank you, Ken, for joining us, and thanks for being on The Future is Old.
Thank you, Ken.
Great to see you both.